I'm going to very quickly present an overview of COVID tracing apps, particularly the privacy and security concerns. These are my personal views, and they're not representing UNSW or any of my funding agencies' views. Also, please read the disclaimer. Especially if you're vulnerable, you should seek independent advice. So basically, this Australian COVID Safe app is using the protocol called Blue Trace protocol, and Singapore app is also using the same protocol. So anything that I'm presenting here is based on Blue Trace, not the actual implementation here in Australia or overseas. Basically, these apps use a client-server model, and once you install the app in your phone, then it will ask you for certain information, and that's your name, phone number, age, range, and postcode, and they get sent to a central server. Now, this central server is held at a health organization of a country, and they will generate a one-time password via SMS that gets sent to your phone. Now this OTP comes on your screen, you input that OTP and it gets sent back to the server. The whole idea of this OTP is to verify your phone to make sure that the phone that you have entered is the one that you're using currently. It's very similar to other apps that you have used. So once this information is stored in the database, it's going to generate what is called a temporary ID. And that basically links your record, whatever phone number and postcode, etc., that you have put in into the server. Now, even this ID is not sent in plain text. The health authorities have a key and they encrypt that, so it comes as encrypted data, and that is called temp ID. It also has expiry time, and I will explain that to you. So this record gets sent back to the user, and once it is stored in your phone, then you are ready to basically use it when you're moving around and your Bluetooth is on. Now, in some cases, the central server can send multiple of these temp IDs. They have a lifetime, so you need a new temp ID so that if you have any disconnection and all, then you don't need to connect to the server. You can use these backup IDs. Now, once you've got this temp ID in your phone, when you're moving around, you're in contact with another Bluetooth device, someone else, then the exchange happens. And that exchange uses this temp ID, your phone's model number, and the transmission power, that is how strong the Bluetooth signal is basically from your phone. And that gets sent to the device which is close by. We'll talk about proximity in a minute. And this gets recorded. So one of the things that it records is called received signal strength. So as a receiver, it's receiving the Bluetooth signal, and it will store the strength of that signal. And that helps with the calculation of how far you are from that other phone. And also the timestamp, that is at what point this exchange happened. Now the phone, who in this case phone B, is going to also generate its own record and send it back to the sender. And phone A also stores this record. So it's important to understand that no other information is exchanged beyond the IDs and the model and the transmission power timestamp. So your phone number is not exchanged here. Be very clear about that. And I'll explain why these things like phone model and transmission power, etc., are needed in a second. So how does the proximity calculation, like how far are you from another phone which is using Bluetooth, works? This is very similar to hearing someone speak from a distance. So if you are far away from the speaker, you hear a very weak voice. As you get closer, you hear a strong voice. So in case of radio, that is called received signal strength indicator, RSSI. If these two phones are very close, then the signal is going to be strong. As they get further away, the signal starts to get weaker and weaker and weaker. Okay. Now, generally speaking, for short distances, this is quite accurate estimation. And this estimation uses an equation whereby you need sender's power, signal power, and that's why we are exchanging that in the previous file. And the receiver basically also records the received signal strength, like what is the amplitude of signal. And by using these things later on at the central server, at the health organization, they can work out how far you were from someone if needed. So that's the important point here. Also, like this estimation can be more or less accurate depending upon the environment. If it's a noisy environment, there are other signals interfering, and that can result in false positive and false negative, which means if you are like far away, like more than 2 meters, and by mistake it can calculate that you are, for example, within 2 meters, or vice versa. Now, the implications of such false positive and false negative is not huge, because in the worst case, the health authorities can contact you saying, were you in the close proximity of this person? Again, like this will happen only when the record is submitted. I'll get back to this point later. So let's have a look at the data upload situation when actually the data leaves your phone. So say someone has been identified as a person infected with COVID, and health authorities contact this person and ask them if they have been using the app. If they confirm that, then the health authority check the credentials in their server, and then they want to authenticate. So same OTP, one-time password, is used to authenticate before you can upload your data. And all your records of the encounter in past is going to be uploaded to this server, and that's the 21-day record. And please note the record is exactly what you have seen in the previous files. So also this process is voluntary, so you don't have to say that you are using tracing app, and at a later point also you can request for deletion of this record. Now, how is this record being used? Basically, health authorities would be checking all these encounter messages. Now, they are the only people who can decrypt this because they have the key. So if your temp ID is broadcasted to someone else, they will not be able to map it to your phone outside of the health organization. So once they have the mapping, they will figure out whose phone number it is, and then they will look at all the records and try to figure out how far you've been from some person and how long, actually, because there will be multiple records. So if you're on a highway and 100 cars are passing by, all those records will be filtered out. So there is going to be some algorithm which will filter out, but also the human being in the loop will look at these things and see if the data is useful or not. So this will happen iteratively through all of the records there, and based on that, then they can contact other people who have chances of contracting the disease. So what happens is that, like, if this temp ID that you were given is broadcast and some malicious actor at location A is able to capture that and then see if they can do something bad with it. So let's say this record was transmitted and say a malicious actor gets that record. They can now move to another location B, and then they can send, say, Alice's record to other people. And that would mean that although Alice was in location A, that gets broadcasted to other people. And if they contract the disease, then Alice may get a call. At the worst, it's a prank. Also, in Australia, like, this kind of thing is basically a punishable act. So in order to minimize this situation, you remember that there was a timer, like lifetime of the record. And typically the Blue Trace recommends 15, but in Australia probably the value is a bit longer, which can give a bigger window of opportunity for doing this kind of prank. But again, like, I believe like this is not a very serious kind of attack. In most cases, these things will be filtered out during the interview process. Now, there has been some concern about whether one can be tracked, because Bluetooth-based system here has been used for contact tracing, but not tracking as to where you're going and so forth. So one thing to remember is that Bluetooth has a range of only 10 meters. So if your ID is being broadcast and you're in a parking lot or somewhere, then someone can recognize that it's you because there is no one else. and it's your ID, and they can follow you. But then someone following you from 10 meters may not need that ID. They might look at you and follow you anyway. Now, the other situation is where there is infrastructure deployed, like iBeacon, in a shopping center or for asset tracking and stuff like that, which happens for advertising as well. So if you enter in that sort of area with your phone, 3 of these beacons will be able to get your signal. They will use something called triangulation, very similar to the cellular network. And then they can figure out where you are in that sort of indoor location. So if some other people are also moving in there, they can also be tracked. Now, the thing is that for this TemplID, COVID-specific tracking, these devices have to be configured to capture these TemplIDs, and that is illegal. So any operator which is trying to identify your TemplID and track where you're going is doing something illegal, and it's punishable. Let's move on to some common questions, because there has been a lot of media report around these things, and I'll try to very quickly go through this list. So first question is my phone number being exchanged with other persons? The answer is no. As you saw there, the record has just the TemplID. Is my contact list being accessed? Again, the answer is no. No one is accessing any contact list, at least from these apps. Now, can someone else map my TemplID to my phone number? The answer is no, because there is no mapping outside of the central server in health organizations, and that is encrypted. Is tracking possible? I gave you some examples. There are other outlier cases that people are talking about, like scanning through an apartment block, and if there are 2 people living and they're using iPhone or Android, then like if one is out, you can keep recording and find out. But again, you have to evaluate whether those kind of things are important for you or not. Can I remove my data once I submit it? In Australia, from my understanding, yes, you can, but please read the privacy statement when you're installing COVID Safe app. Other health organizations would also have this information on their website. Now, another question which I've seen is, when will this database held at health authorities be removed? From what I have read, it is like end of pandemic, but I don't know more specifics about that. So my understanding is that once this pandemic is declared by government to be done, this database should be deleted. Can this database be used for other purposes by anyone? The answer is no. Government has made it very clear that this database is for pandemic and there is no other use. But also you can see that it's not storing a lot. It's just your name and a phone number. Many other organizations have this information, like you're using it for e-commerce, your phone companies, your RTAs, and who not. So I don't think it's a particularly disturbing thing, in my opinion. Is GPS data being used? The answer is no. In Australian app or in Singapore app, GPS data is not used. In other countries, maybe yes. For example, in India, I'm aware that they're using GPS. Is Bluetooth safe? Some older version of Bluetooth had some security vulnerabilities. The newer versions are much safer, and I believe these apps are supporting only the newer versions. So I think it's as safe as any information communication system can be. I'll probably conclude about that at the end of my talk. What if someone else carried my phone? That's a very good question. And there is no way of this kind of app to recognize who is carrying your phone. Although in research, there are activity recognition type work where like your gait can be recognized, but these apps are not using that. So yes, someone else can carry your phone, and if they are by mistake, then health authorities may call you saying, oh, you have chance of infection. And I don't think that's a big worry, because we want to have maximum number of people checked, actually. Now, one question that is very common is that, is contact tracing app a panacea? My personal take is no. All it is doing is helping the health authorities in making a better decision. So you still need human experts sitting, interviewing people who are infected, and under the Pandemic Act, they can interview. So I guess they will be asking for more private information to reveal. And again, this is very voluntary, so it's not kind of doing anything more than that. Now, can we use a machine learning tool to check all these records and do proximity and stuff? My guess is that at this stage, there can be a lot of false positive negatives. And so a human expert has to look at that data, maybe in some sort of summary form, and then they can make a decision. Now, there has been a lot of talk about distributed app design. That can be a separate talk, but I must say from my reading, I see that there are a lot more privacy issues or security issues in distributed apps. So I don't think that's either a very, very safe bet compared to the current apps used in Australia and Singapore. So in conclusion, is this safe? Is your privacy 100% guaranteed? Answer is no. But you got to evaluate whether your risks are higher than using other social media like Facebook and some others. Or when you're walking inside a shopping center, there are 100 cameras and they are looking at you and they can track you. So I guess one needs to weigh these issues and then make a decision. Thank you very much.